Okay, I think that we can start. We have close to 10 people in. So thank you very much to all of the people that have joined this session about sport and cinema hosted by the University of Central University of Catalonia and the Spring Network. The Spring Network is the Sport and Politics Research International Network. It's a network of researchers around Europe and the United States that want to focus the attention on the intersection between sport and politics, as well as communication and other social disciplines. Today, we are going to talk about sport and cinema, and we have a fantastic keynote speaker who is Seán Crosson, a good friend of our university, a good friend of my fellow Nawal, who is working with me at the university, and a good fellow, associate professor of the Houston School of Film and Media Studies of the University of Galway. So thank you very much, Seán, to be in our university, the University of Vic, to be one of the core group members of the Spring Research Network, and to offer us the opportunity to listen you talking about your research area, which is a sport in cinema, sport in European cinema. So thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Xavi, and thank you, Nawal. It's a huge pleasure to be able to speak as part of this series, and I'm grateful also not just to the University of Vic, but to Jim O'Brien and to the Sport and Politics Research Network Spring, which is hosting this series as well. So it's a great privilege and pleasure to be able to participate and to talk about what you can see behind me here. Sorry, that's it. The Sport in European Cinema database, which I've set up here at the University of Galway, where I'm based. And in fact, this builds on, I gave a talk in 2021 at the Spring Foundation Symposium, which was held at the Catholic University of Lille in October 2021. And this is kind of building on that paper and bringing things up to date. At that time, it was still very much under development, whereas it is an actual working database and functioning research platform now. So it's a chance to share with you some of the findings there and some insights into aspects of it that the research kind of highlighted as the work was ongoing. So to start, on the 17th of June 2008, the American Film Institute presented as part of a CBS television special AFI's 10 Top 10, a listing of the 10 greatest American films and 10 classic film genres. And among the genres chosen was the sports genre, which the AFI defined as involving, quote, films with protagonists who play athletics or other games.
May we have some problems with Seán?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's wait. Let's wait for a minute.
Okay.
Can we call Seán, Nawal?
Yeah, no problem. I can call him.
Okay. So sorry for this situation. We will have to wait for Seán that has problems with his connection.
My apologies, Avi and guests.
Don't worry.
The network just collapsed. The university network, Wi-Fi network just went down. Bad timing.
It is the seminar. It is the seminar where we have more attendance.
Okay.
So don't worry for this, Seán.
I'm really sorry. My apologies. I've just connected to another network, my own hotspot. In fact, so I'm praying to the gods of the internet that things will work for the next while. So I'll just pick up from where I was, if that's okay. And actually, it reminded me when we cut out that I'd forgotten to share my my slides. So I might do that now when I have this opportunity. So we can bring some of that into the conversation. So, as I was saying, the sports film genre is well established in the American context. Less research has been undertaken of the European experience of sports cinema to date and its growing importance in this context. So the paper I'm about to give, or the talk I'm about to give, will introduce this new database, which, as I've said, you can see the front page from behind me here. And it's not just a database, it's an online research platform. It has bibliographies, it has a blog, it has case studies, and a section where people can respond and contribute to it as well. And that's a really, really important part of what we're trying to do, because I'm conscious that there is certainly gaps in trying to cover such a huge number of films across a lot of countries. And I'm already getting some really helpful feedback from people following previous talks. So if there are gaps you identify when you visit and explore the database, please do contact me. And there's a section on the platform where you'll be able to return your contact. So within the database, which, as I said, is now publicly available at sportandfilm.eu, it enables a deeper consideration of the significance of sport in the European context, identifying salient aspects of the genre and its revealing engagement with European society and culture. And as part of this discussion today, I'm also going to be bringing out a case study of Russian sports cinema, which I found particularly fascinating as something that came up in the research, the increasing growth and importance of Russian sports cinema, and to understand why some of the kind of implications of that and some of what's going on within that development, which I'll discuss in the second half of today's talk. So a recurring issue across the many critical interventions with regard to European cinema is the challenge of defining the area, given the diverse and distinct cultures and cinemas that Europe encompasses, evident in the title of one of Wendy Everett's, a leading contributor to the discourse, articles, quote, "Dinosaur Shipwreck or Museum Piece, the Unstable Identity of European Cinema." Nonetheless, the European context constitutes an important dimension of film production and reception across the continent, if only in terms of the increasingly important transnational funding models that now exist with regard to European cinema, and the peripatetic and transnational character of the European Film Festival circuit. As one of the most distinctive and popular features of European culture, sport may offer a further means of defining European cinema today. Europe was a crucial location for the development of modern sport, both in the spirit of the Olympics, but also in the first codifications of various global sports, from association football to cricket, rugby, and tennis in 19th century Britain and France. Furthermore, sport constitutes a crucial aspect of many European citizens' everyday identities, a fact evident within the large number of European film productions featuring sport. Now, while underdeveloped, important analyses have been undertaken of individual European sports films as part of a broader consideration of European cinema, though there are specific challenges in researching the area on a large scale, including, of course, the linguistic variations involved. However, one could argue that it's precisely this linguistic diversity that provides a defining feature of European cinema, and indeed, this is prominently featured in recent European co-productions, including in the 2020 cycling team co-production between Irish, Belgian, and Luxembourg partners, The Racer. This is a film defined and distinguished by its Europeanness, focused on the experiences of Dominique Chabot, pictured here prominently in the poster, riding in the 1998 Tour de France, which the initial stages of which took place in Ireland. The production features a range of nationalities, including Belgian, Scottish, English, Portuguese, Italian, French, Luxembourger, and Irish, while Chabot's racing team also features a New Zealand rider. However, a further, still more unusual feature as regards the dominant American model of sports cinema is the diverse use of language. Chabot is at least trilingual, moving between French and English with team members and speaking his native Flemish in conversations over the phone with his sister. Other languages featured include Italian and briefly Spanish and Portuguese. Even the Irish language has its moment, as we hear the Aer Lingus pilot shares his few words of Irish as the plane carrying the riders to Ireland make its final descent. Language and multilingualism were founding principles of the European Union and have been a key concern throughout its history, evident in its recognition and facilitation at considerable expense today of 24 official working languages. This is indeed a striking, commendable feature of the racer in its foregrounding of linguistic diversity with lengthy non-English speaking sequences in a variety of language in a genre not renowned for this practice. It reflects broader concerns with foregrounding international intercultural encounters within European co-produced sports cinema, which I've written about previously. I'm going to play a very short scene from this, just to give you a little example of how that kind of range of languages is foregrounded within the film in this sequence, which just precedes the first stage, cycling stage featured in the film.
Se ha acercado para darles bienvenida por causa da Copa do Mundo que está acontecendo na França.
Yes, and here we are on an unusually sunny day in Dublin, the capital city of the Emerald Isle, where the Grand Depart is not far off. Today, there's a carnival atmosphere, and Irish eyes are smiling.
So, to date, most research on European cinema, or rather European sports films in particular, has focused on individual case studies of exemplary films, like the three films featured here in this slide: Olympia, Leni Riefenstahl's classic documentary, Chariots of Fire, or Le Triplet de Belleville, or the development of sports cinema within specific national contexts. For example, Jones's work on British sports film, Roma Guerra, Rodriguez Diaz and Ashton, respectively, on the Spanish sports film, Cunningham and Fodor, respectively, on Hungarian football films, McDougall on East German football films, or my own work on Gaelic games on film in Ireland. This national focus also speaks to a further key aspect of European sports cinema, primarily within specific national contexts. Indeed, in some countries, in most legal box office, works that limited international impact. For example, this is a Norwegian film called Pre-75, fiction film about Pre in Norway, extremely the most popular release feature film. This film we're going to come back to shortly, a Russian film called Going Vertical, or 3 Seconds, from 2017, which is one of the third most popular film ever released office. 2018 called Campeones, a basketball team film, which was in 2018 topped the box office. Spain itself, today, has developed its own distinctive subgenre of sports cinema, Spanish. Examples of which slide that have been remarkably popular in history, and there's going on in Barcelona at the moment by Manuel Garin, looking at this phenomenon in, and it's an area of contemporary research, but also an example of how sports cinema has really captured a significant national popular culture. This association, however, with national cultures has seen some sport films articulate popularizing sometimes questionable or repressive political ideologies, including in Nazi Germany and Francoist Spain. And all of these films here, for example, were released during Franco's regime and were connecting very clearly to concerns being expressed, ideological concerns of that regime in those decades. And there's evidence of the employment of sport and film to affirm and promote hegemonic and exclusionary constructions of national identity, a practice I will contend shortly continues to be evident in contemporary Russian cinema. However, the advent of the European Economic Community in 1957 and subsequently the European Union from 1993, and the establishment of a range of European funding initiatives, co-funding initiatives, including Euro-Image, established by the Council of Europe in 1999, and the EU's own media programme from 1991, has encouraged and facilitated the increasing importance of co-production partnerships in the production of European films, including sports film, accounting now, based on our research and compiling the database, for approximately 20% of relevant productions. So, to speak of sports cinema in the European context, it seemed necessary for me to identify the extent and nature of this cinema as it has developed historically across Europe as a whole. While film studies has been dominated by qualitative approaches, including, I should say, my own research, quantitative work on genre has been evident for some time. An early example was John B. Kuyper's 1964 study of American Civil War films, where he noted, in words very relevant also to sports cinema, that while many of the relevant films have justifiably been ignored by critics due to their questionable quality, nonetheless, quote, the film historian ought to be aware of all the products of a given genre of film production. To an historian, a difference in quantity ought to be critical because in the spectator-oriented popular art world of the film, the number of films made during a given decade or year can be indicative of the opinions, attitudes, and conceptions of both the filmmakers and the audiences of the period, end quote. With regard to sports cinema in particular, apart from themed filmographies on the genre by Wallenfeld and Williams, respectively, only one in-depth quantitative survey has to date been undertaken, though perhaps understandably, given that the majority of films emerge from the United States in the American context. Pearson, Cortes, Haney, and Chang, in their article Sports Films, Social Dimensions Over Time, 1930 to 95, identified 590 American films in that period and examined the various trends apparent, including sports depicted in films, their shifts over time, film content and theme, and social and cultural relevance. And I found this article to be quite useful in terms of when I was setting out in the process of setting up the database and considering how to structure it and the kind of visualizations associated with this was a helpful starting point and an informative article for the work that has been done on the database and that I'm discussing today. The research towards the compilation of the sport in European cinema was undertaken at the University of Galway, and I should acknowledge the assistance in that process by two research assistants, Dr. Veronica Johnson and Noel Hendrick, and the digital humanities manager, David Kelly of the Moore Institute at the University of Galway, who provided the technical support to realise the database and platform. The project was also supported from University of Galway's College of Arts, Social Sciences and Celtic Studies Strategic Research Development Scheme. One of the first challenges we encountered in our research was the lack of an entirely comprehensive database of European cinema. In addition, those databases that do exist, including the European Film Directory, don't currently provide the facility to research by sport or sport genre. While recognising the importance of non-fiction sport films in Europe, both of specific sports, due to the sheer number of films involved, I focused to date in our database on fictional and theatrically released works produced or co-produced by or with a European company that features sport, sports people or followers of sport prominently, and in which sport is an important aspect of the plot development or motivation. However, the challenge in this exercise was not just deciding what films qualify as sport films and how we define that term, but equally the linguistic challenges we encounter in attempting to undertake a pan-European study of a popular cinema genre. For our purposes, we began with perhaps the most well-known and comprehensive database of international cinema, the Internet Movie Database, or IMDb. In deciding to start here, I was entirely conscious of the limitations of this resource, including the gaps that exist regarding international cinema, but also the issues with how films are classified there. What IMDb does offer, however, is the possibility to identify sport, feature film, and country as categories, allowing us to examine what is classified in this way, and then to extrapolate from there. In total, I found relevant sport films listed in 37 European countries. Certainly, this is an imperfect measure and one that needs to be interrogated at each point, as I've been doing as I compiled the database, and has been supplemented by relevant studies of the genre, national, as well as national and international databases where available. And I should say increasingly by feedback from fellow academics and members of the public that have attended talks I've given or who have responded to the section on the database, the web platform that allows us feedback to be given on new additions or corrections on entries that are already there. So the first striking figure from the research was the sheer number of relevant films, even focusing only on theatrically released fiction work. And this is just to give you a sense from the platform. Currently, we have 937 fiction feature films, and this is incomplete because I've just got some more in the past week following a talk I gave at the Irish Screen Studies Conference a few weeks ago. So it's growing all the time. And that's an important part, as I said, it's something that needs to be flexible and can grow and can evolve in response to feedback and as the genre itself grows indeed. So 937 between 1910, when the first fiction production we've identified, the British-made Rogues of the Turf, hence the title of this paper, was made, and up to the end of 2022. Growth of production in that period. And you can see it's particularly grown over the last, say, 30, 40 years or so. Examining the distribution of sports across films in over the past century or more indicates a number of further salient features. Firstly, association football is by far and this is, of course, a big difference to what you find in Hollywood, where football means something very, very different form of football. Whereas in Europe, the sports film is dominated by association football as the most popular team sport across the continent. But other popular films include boxing, horse racing, which might surprise a few, but I'm going to comment on that in a moment, and athletics. Secondly, we can identify differing sports come into prominence in different periods, reflecting larger social changes in the time concerned. For example, while horse racing is modestly represented overall, featuring in about 9% of the films included, this is concentrated in the United Kingdom, and in particular in the 1920s, when around 50% of all films featuring horse racing, European films, were released. This was a period in which, according to Mike Huggins, horse racing has a powerful claim to be Britain's leading interwar sport. And this is reflected in the number of films produced in the period featuring horse racing. A further pattern evident from the analysis is the increasing number of sports featured in film from 1970s onwards, more than doubling from 25 up to 1916 to over 60 represented by the end of 2022. A further feature evident is the very significant increase in production over the past 20 years. And here's another graph. By the way, all of these visualizations you see are examples of what can be done with the data in the database right now. So you can go in, you can see, you can pick a sport featured, and you can have it visualized if you're looking for a particular research or visualizations of content that's in the database. These are just a few examples to illustrate. So 40% of all films produced have been produced since, as I said, over the past 20 years. Our data also allows us to assess what the dominant associated genres are in sports cinema in Europe, with drama dominating, as you can see here in blue, though comedy is also well represented. But how does this relate to individual countries then? As this visualization indicates, by far the most prolific country to produce or co-produce sports cinema is the UK, followed by Germany, France, the Soviet Union, and subsequently Russian Federation, Spain, Italy, and Italy. The high number of British produced or co-produced sports films reflects on one level the prominence of sport, of course, in the United Kingdom, particularly association football. However, the fact that the UK shares a language and strong cultural ties with the United States, the producer of most sports films overall, has also contributed to the large number of these films produced in the country. This is evident in the high number of UK-US co-produced sports films, with 13% of UK-produced sports films having an American co-producer. So, during the research, I was struck by the increasing presence of sports cinema genre in the Russian context over the past 20 years. Here's just a slide that captures that kind of growth, specifically in the Russian context between 1992 and 2022. A period that coincides, and it's interesting that the biggest increase is from the early 2000s onwards, a period that coincides with the presidency, prime ministership, and presidency again of Vladimir Putin. It also, of course, parallels a larger national project associated with the regime of Putin, himself a keen sportsman, whereby sport has been employed as a key vehicle for the promotion of nationalism and patriotism in Russia today. As Richard Arnold, in line with many other recent commentators, including Alexei Arnold and Foxell, Gorokov, Greeks, and Kramariva has noted, sports policy is a central part of the Russian government strategy to promote nationalism, and it is consciously evoking the Soviets numerous reasons to suggest sports of nation relatively young identity in the after Cold. Second, Germany virtually lacks a voice of many parts of the Soviet legacy are profoundly alienating elements of and so witness of valuable attributes. And particular mosaic means that ethnic national options regime has to find other ways of emphasizing sport in a critic of doing so. However, of course, popular success in winning the bidding process to host both the Sochi Winter Olympics in 2014 and the subsequent FIFA World Cup in 2018, both events were greatly tarnished from an international first Crimea, a process which began and subsequently by the revelations of a state-sponsored doping regime that led to a ban being imposed by the International Association Federation on Russian athletes competing in international competitions. Film in the country has provided an important platform for Russia to articulate its response, if principally Gaudian, to this international criticism. While it's understandable that in this increasing, or generally in Russia, prominently in the countries, the sports featured and the overall focus of these films is particularly interesting. Firstly, there's an evident emphasis apparent on sports dependent on physical prowess, in particular martial arts, with over 1/3 of the Russian sports films produced since 1992 focused on boxing, MMA, or wrestling, and you get a sense of the dominant sports. Football, of course, reflecting its dominance, but apart from that, boxing and martial arts very, very highly represented. This focus on physicality is also evident across many of the other films depicting team sports, including most prominently football. Focus with regard to the Soviet past, evident in some of the most films released, including this film, it concerns the so-called World War II in Kiev's team flex, which was largely based on Soviet propaganda. A Western, probably better known, John Huston, Escape to Victory, but in this particular, the Ukrainian-speaking characters are Nazi characters, while the Russian speakers are liberators, which is an interesting kind of precursor to the contemporary political discourse dominating Russia today in light of the invasion of Ukraine. This film, a second very popular film, Legend Number 17 from 2013, concerns Soviet hockey player Valery Kharlamov. This he photographed at the film in April 2013. Further films include Champions, 5 profiles of actual Russian Olympic, as the film's publicity material describes it. Victories earned, quote, through hard work, respect, and belief in yourself, country, and a related production by the for the Russian Olympic champions. However, I'm going to finish today by talking about this particular film, and this is the entry from our database going vertical from 2017. This film is the extraordinarily successful, the third most successful Indigenous film ever released at the Russian box office, taking $95,225,622 $1,000,000 at the domestic box office alone in Russia. Interestingly, the only other major market where it had an impact was in China, where the film became the highest grossing Russian film ever released, taking $12.3 million on its release there. Such as the film's impact being in Russia, that it became an important part of the domestic discourse concerning Russia's response to international criticism for both sporting and military actions over the past 10 years. And even some media outlets have suggested have contributed in a small way to the re-election of Vladimir Putin in 2018. The film's subject is a very rare and unexpected victory of the Soviet Union over the all-conquering United States in the basketball event at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. The timing of the release was highly significant. It was 3 weeks after the decision of the International Olympic Committee to bar the Russian team from competing at the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea, following the discovery of the state-sponsored doping regime, and 3 months before the Russian presidential election. The film would become bound up with both these events in the discourse that followed its release. After a closed screening of the film in Moscow in early December 2017, Radio Free Europe reported that Russian news anchor for the main state channel Rossiya 1 and head of the official Russian government-owned international news agency Rossiya Segedanya, Dmitry Kiselov, gushed that many in the audience left the theatre in tears, but also as if they were flying. Kiselov, well known for his colourful anti-American diatribes, predicted it would become the essential film of the entire New Year holidays. Kiselov's segment on the film aired 2 days before the IOC's December 5th announcement of the punitive measures against Russian athletes. Of course, the doping scandal surrounding our national team is a difficult, unfair and painful situation. But when has it ever been easy for our athletes? Kisselov said in his introduction to the report, which also included a sarcastic sideswipe at the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA. Such was the popularity of Going Vertical on release that it was estimated by Reuters that the film in its first 3 weeks was watched by over 9 million people, or approximately 1 in 12 registered voters in Russia. Going Vertical emphasizes repeatedly patriotism, which is perhaps to be expected given the allegiances of those behind the work, not to mention the fact that it was largely state-funded. The film was produced by Nikita Mikhalkov, head of the Russian Cinematographers Union and chairman of one of Russia's most successful production houses, 3T Productions. He is also one of Vladimir Putin's strongest supporters. Here, photographs with Putin during an earlier production. He produced a television program for Putin's 55th birthday, co-signed an open letter asking Putin not to step down after the expiry of the second term in office in 2008, and subsequently received the present from Putin on 10th of December 2015, the First Degree Order of Merit for the Fatherland, the highest civilian honor in Russia. At the film's premiere at the October Cinema in Moscow in December the 22nd, 2017, Mikhalkov told the audience that the movie was designed to dilute what he described as, quote, Western hostility towards Russia, as shown by the banning of our Olympic and Paralympian teams. It is a counterweight to what is happening to us with sanctions, double standards, untruth, fakes, and lies. It's a film that, like an arrow, pierces all of this, end quote. For Vladimir Medinsky, Russia's then culture minister, the film feeds, quote, an appetite to feel pride in one's country, something he said his ministry sponsored. The lead actor in Going Vertical, Vladimir Mashkov, who plays Soviet coach Vladimir Garishin and is here pictured at the center of the poster for the film, also has a close connection with the current Russian president. Mashkov, formerly nominated as a prominent member of the All-Russian People's Front, Putin for re-election ahead of the March 18, 2018 vote. Indeed, as one of Russia's most prominent film actors, he was featured heavily in the Russian media at the time of that nomination, as evident in this image here of him entering the meeting to make the nomination on December 26, 2 days before the release, the general release of Going Vertical, and at a time when the film was prominently depicted in the Russian media. The film's poster, designed by Russian art designers Anna Uitnova and Anna Nikolaeva on the direction of Igor Sheremetev from Central Partnership Distribution Company, is itself fascinating and distinctive in its rendering of sporting figures. Indeed, in its depiction of central characters in the film standing heroically and gazing into the distance with the Soviet flag draped behind, it resembles remarkably this Soviet poster, classic Soviet poster, produced by seminal poster artist Viktor Semenovich Ivanov in 1945, depicting an idealized image of workers. This poster was typical of the propaganda spread by the country's communist government in the mid-20th century, with the translated text beneath the text beneath in translation reading, the USSR is the socialist state for factory workers and peasants. We could spend this entire session talking about this post. I think it's extraordinary, the kind of the messaging that's going on, the signifiers within it, and it's the way it's evoking that kind of nostalgia for a Soviet past. But just to pick up on one interesting parallel there is to how the central figure in Ivanov's classic poster is clutching a device emblazoned with the letters of the USSR. This is replaced in Coach Garishin's hand by a basketball, suggesting that sport can perform the role undertaken previously by the Soviet Union as a political entity to bring together the diverse cultures and ethnicities today inhabiting the Russian Federation. It is this theme to which I will now turn to finish up in considering the film. Going Vertical's patriotism is evident particularly in its focus on the efforts of the Soviet basketball team to overcome seemingly unconquerable Americans, but also in how the film transcends through sport the divisions between members of the Soviet team. The film contrasts, for example, in its depiction of the climactic Olympic final game against the United States, the noble and heroic acts of the Soviet players with the underhand and violent actions of their American counterparts. Indeed, earlier in the film, during a game against a US college basketball team, it strongly suggested that the use of banned substances by Soviet players was inspired by the actions witnessed by the Soviet players of an American basketball player already benefiting from these illegal methods. The irony, of course, is that on several levels, the film is hugely indebted to American culture and society. Firstly, the film follows the pattern in almost every respect of the most successful American sports films, including the overall underdog trajectory that sees a team rife with internal conflict coming together to achieve victory, the conflicted and tortured coach figure trying to figure out new ideas, bring new ideas into the team, Vladimir Garishin, who is also attempting to leave the USSR to get medical attention for his disabled son, the extended montage sequences that follow the Soviet team's development of both individual skills and team cohesion, and the climactic final game that eventually brings victory after repeated defeats earlier in the film. Furthermore, the principal contribution of the new coach who joins the team at the outset is bringing what he calls American methods to their play. Also the use of performance-enhancing substances. The coach also insists that his players Paralympics and is given permission to do so by his superiors. Going vertical also the brush and defines this in broad and patriotic sporting terms. One of the major conflicts in the team concerns 10 players part Union, Lithuania, the home country of the team's captain, Modestas Palauskas, pictured here on the right next to the team coach, George to sport, invoking loyalty to one's teammates and the team as a whole as a means to overcome these ethnic differences, an appeal that shares strong parallels in particularly asserts Lithuania and team to play for better money elsewhere in Europe. However, ultimately, that his real family is the sporting team itself, and he returns to play in the Olympic final. Now, but this is a clip from the film of a kind of a central sequence where a conversation happens to convince Modestas to stay with the team. But it's the way in which this is framed and messaging here, which is subtle, but when you put it in the context of contemporary events in Ukraine, is quite sinister in listening to what is said and the way in which his home country is described. And
Едешь в Москву олимпийским чемпионом, не тронут. А так больше не выпустят. Какие шансы у нас, я не знаю. Вы, ребята, сильные. Но американцы очень хотят. Если что-то задумал, делай прямо сейчас.
Спасибо, конечно, но... Вам же эта игра была так нужна. Вы ради нее нас, себя гробили. А сейчас так говорите, с чего это?
Что у тебя в жизни самое главное? Эта игра.
Ясно. Прощайте.
Давай.
Что, будешь против нас играть?
Давай только без этого, а? Ты еще песенку мне про родину заведи. Моя родина Литва, а не это ваша.
У меня родина тоже не это ваша. У меня родина мама, папа. Баскетбол, клуб и товарищи.
С кем не разговариваешь, какие не...
Так себе. Слушай, я все понимаю. Ну, у всех такая мысль была. Там и денег больше, и мяч лучше скачет, там за неделю починят. Но я бы своих не бросил.
Без своими-то стали.
Давно. Понял только сейчас.
It may come as no surprise to learn that, with the exception of the climactic events of the film, the narrative strays considerably from historical fact. With regard to the scene just screened, as noted by Sidorchik and others, there's no historical evidence to indicate that Pulauskas was indeed a dissident who had plans to defect. What we find here is but one of a series of aspects of the film that are more concerned with responding to contemporary anxieties than historical accuracy. There is in this scene, and indeed Russia rather than the West. Epitomize a number of films found across Russian sports cinema today. These films emphasize physicality and strength. They are also, particularly in their most popular manifestations, very influenced by the American model of the genre that emphasizes, above all, what we might call the underdog trajectory. These films are also working to overcome, using the seductive, appealing, and emotionally charged sporting context, depicted contemporary tensions within Russian society, while grooming a domestic audience for larger political ideologies and actions. Indeed, the overriding focus of this genre in Russia is on national rather than transnational conceptions of identity or meaning, a pattern that is evident across many further films from across Europe that we have included in our platform. As such, while recognizing the increasing importance of co-productions encouraged by various pan-European funding initiatives, one might view the sports film genre in Europe as more often a barometer of and significant contributor to nationalist feeling. Frequently, sport is invoked, or one could contend employed, in film to accentuate nationalist feelings, particularly at moments of crisis or threat to hegemonic national culture. Significantly, Going Vertical was re-released on March the 5th, 2022, a little over 1 week after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th, when it enjoyed its biggest success at the Russian box office, taking 48 million nearly $49 million of its total domestic gross of $95 million. In the words of Eric Hobsbawm, speaking of football rather than basketball, but nonetheless still relevant, quote, "The imagined community of millions seem much more real as a team of 11. And film has provided a powerful platform in the Russian context and across Europe to realize this possibility." Thank you. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you very much for this fantastic presentation. It was very interesting, although we had some moments where your speech had some problems of connection. But don't worry for that. I think that the message was very clear at the end, and we have now time for discussion. Some ideas that can be taken into account. And we have actually one question from Aaron saying, maybe you can read it also, Sean.
Yes.
Aaron, okay. It says, in what ways do European sports film challenge or reinforces cultural stereotypes, both within Europe or in relation to other parts of the world? Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that's, I suppose, evident not just in sports cinema, but in genre. So genre, particularly popular mainstream genres, of which sports cinema is a good example, tend to be more, how do we say, more in line with kind of hegemonic discourses, right? So when it comes to reinforcing cultural stereotypes, more often than not, sports cinema, particularly the more popular examples of sports cinema, will do precisely that. It will tend to reinforce established cultural stereotypes. Where you find films that challenge that tends to be the lower budget, more counterculture or independent films, that are trying to reimagine kind of ethnicities or gender, for example, or different aspects of experiences in particular societies. So kind of great examples of that is, like, in the British context, films like The Sporting Life or Longest Distance Runner, which are kind of pushing against the kind of dominant discourses of British society in that period. You find examples elsewhere. I'm reaching in the European context because the films I've looked at tended to be more mainstream, but internationally, films like, for example, there's a wonderful Iranian film called Offside from Jafar Panahi, which is looking at the issue of gender in sport in Iran and the manner in which female supporters are excluded from games because of, doctrine and dogma in that country. So in general, sports cinema, in its kind of most popular manifestations, tends to be more about engaging with a kind of dominant discourse, and those kind of stereotypes tend to be there. Unfortunately, it's the lower budget films where you get more experimentation and more willingness to kind of question those kind of dominant stereotypes. Sorry. Thank you for your question, Aaron, and thank you for your comment, Phil, as well. I see and it's fantastic. Phil Dine, a mentor of mine here in University of Galway, a previous colleague, now a emeritus professor from French here, but who was critical to getting sport up and running within our college. So I'm grateful to him for joining to talk today, and for the internet challenges we had. So absolutely, the intention is to include documentary, funding permitted. So this was done, we didn't even have a shoestring literally to put this together. We were working on a very, very tiny budget just to get a prototype up and running. So the intention is to apply for funding, European funding, to expand this. Like, in terms of documentary, you're talking about multiples of the number of fiction film, probably 4 or 5 times as many. And there's other resources that we like to develop, like learning resources, for example, on the platform, to be able to integrate that, to integrate more moving image material and so on. So there's a huge amount to be done yet, and that will hopefully come in time once the funding, if we're successful in getting. So if there's any funders in the room, please, in the future.
We have another question from Jonathan, saying, thanks a lot for your talk, Sean. Have you noticed any differences between extent to which countries take sport films seriously? I've often been struck by how little has been written about French sport film, given how many there are. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, the reality is that the academic discourse around sports cinema really only emerged from the late 80s onwards, and it's only really in the last 10 years that you're beginning to see a large number of works emerging on the topic. That's because, I think, largely because sports cinema, as I've said, was viewed as kind of lesser kind of cinema. It was viewed as kind of populist cinema of lesser quality, and film scholars tended to kind of turn their noses up, but it wasn't really something that drew their attention to the extent, apart from kind of notable exceptions being films, classic films like Raging Bull or Olympia or Rocky or whatever. But in general, the genre didn't really get the attention perhaps that it deserved until recent decades. But you'll know, Jonathan, as well, even in the French context, I was at, there was a wonderful conference in Limoges in France last year that I contributed to, and there's been several publications dedicated to sports film that are, including, by the way, just this book here. I don't know if you can see that, which I contributed to. I don't know if you can see that, but anyway, it's Sport and Cinema, edited by Thomas Bauer, Luc Delacroix, and Hugo Gervil-Reich. It's a collection mostly in French. My contribution's in English, but it's one of a range of books that have come out in France in the last couple of years. Another guy, Julien Camy, probably mispronouncing the name, has written several books on the topic in French as well, not just looking at it in France, but internationally. So there's been a huge growth in the scholarship, which I welcome, and I'm delighted to see in over the last, say, 10 to 15 years. And yeah, sorry, I hope that addressed your question, Jonathan, but thank you for that.
We also have a question from Maria Forga, who is one of our cinema lecturers at the University of Galway. He's very focused on narratives and gender equality in communication. There's a question which I said, Maria, using our chat, internal chat. I said, this is a question that also rings me a bell.
Yeah.
Based on, don't you think sport movies can show and denounce stereotypes of LGBT or women? Women football is interesting, although has less audiences. I was also wondering if Russian cinema can strengthen the stereotypes of masculinity, very linked with how Putin is. I don't know. Can you do a reflection on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, as I've said, that's certainly what's been going on in Russia, is that film has been used as a key resource, popular culture resource, to affirm and to popularize kind of hegemonic constructions of Russianness, of masculinity. And it's rare that women, for example, feature in Russian cinema. Certainly, there's huge potential within this genre to foreground and to engage. And while the LGBT community, now there's a film called 11 Men Out, I think, an Icelandic film that looks at a gay football team from Iceland. And I'm pretty sure there's a number of small budget films that have come out looking at female teams or gay LGBT issues, but it's still not. It's certainly underdeveloped. It's an area that needs kind of more developed, more work in terms of women's depiction more generally. The genre is so dominated by masculinity and by men historically. There are some exceptions in recent years where women, but sometimes it's dealt with, I think, less successfully. So probably one of the most famous examples is $1 Million Baby, that has the female boxer. But within this film, it's essentially a film about Clint Eastwood, a male coach, and so in some ways Maggie Fitzgerald's story is peripheral, and that's often the way in mainstream films. But you have films that are trying to girl fight, for example, as an example of a film about a female boxer that's trying to push against the dominant stereotypes and to foreground more female characters. But I certainly think that movies have the potential as popular culture to provide more nuanced and more productive engagements with the LGBT experience going forward. You're on mute there, Xavier.
Thank you very much. Maria also
Series,
to include series in this study.
Yeah, I see Russell had his hand up, but we'll come to Russell. We'll come to you in a second. Great, you could join the talk as well.
Yeah, Russell, I put Russell as a panelist to join.
Yeah, series. There's so many great series now. One of my favorite is Sunderland Till I Die, as a long-suffering Sunderland football supporter. Phil will know what that means. I think probably more, and Russell will as well. But there's been some wonderful series. There's Formula One as well. The series Drive to Survive at the moment. There's the last. Well, I'm thinking of. I mean, the Last Dance, American series. But there's a lot. Like if you go on to it's something that reflects the growth of this genre as well. Is that there's so much of this content now on streaming platforms as well. And so many series now dedicated to sport. So certainly in the future, this is somewhere we'd like to extend to, but it's just the sheer scale of it. We started with feature films. We're hoping to then move to documentaries. And then when you move into television, both series and one-off TV films or TV docs, it's just, the scale is just so much content. It's about how you can kind of manage that in a way and work towards being able to include more of that in time, which is certainly our intention, to be as comprehensive as possible of the experience and of the depiction of sport across Europe. Thank you, Maria.
Okay. Let me give the floor to Russell Holden, who's one of our core members on the Spring Research Network. Russell, very welcome to this session. Do you want to offer us some insights? Russell? I don't know if we have problems of connection. Russell? I don't know if there is any. We're waiting for Russell. I don't know if is there any question from the audience. Another questions for that? No. I want to wait for Russell because maybe he has some problems with connection. Just a last question, Sean. Analyzing the Russian cinema, did you notice or have you considered if the current Russian cinema in the Putin area follows a very old narrative, talking about the patriotic war, the masculinity stereotype? Does this type of cinema follow an old narrative but include current and updated technical perspectives on broadcasting and on recording the films, or it's not a very updated cinema in terms of technical issues?
So the film is, as I mentioned, it's very indebted to the American sports cinema genre. Like it's fascinating to watch a film like Going Vertical back to back with a film like Rocky IV. Is that the one where Dolph Lundgren plays the Soviet enhanced kind of boxer as a Cold War? So this is what we're seeing here is a reworking in a Russian context of aesthetics kind of developed and popularized within Hollywood, but using them for their own purposes. There's not a huge amount of innovation technically in terms of what they're doing with the genre, and even in the scene, it's using the very similar kind of montage sequences of teams training. The whole narrative trajectory of the work as well is so familiar to us in the West, but it's inverting, whereas often in the West we encounter Russians as the antagonist, as the bad guy, the evil guy, whereas here it's the Americans. The Americans are the kind of the bad guy.
Russell, the floor is yours.
How's it going? It's great to see you. You're muted though.
You're muted, Russell. Russell, you're muted.
No, I think that he's not mute, but we cannot listen to him. I don't know why, because his mic is on, but we cannot.
Sorry. So for some reason we can't.
We can
it might be one of the features on this platform. Do you want to put it in the chat, Russell? Sorry about that. Do you want to put your question in the chat? It's not, it won't let you talk on the, I don't know.
Let's see if Russell can put the question into the chat.
Now, I wonder if you can change his status to a panelist rather than an attendee.
No, Russell can.
He's already a panelist.
Yeah, he wrote the question. How difficult is to separate him from documentary? I noticed only 2 cricket films. Russell always talking about cricket.
Yeah,
you're one of them.
It's very difficult. There's not a huge number of cricket films, but I'm sure we might be missing. I know there's sequences in some films that may not, like just blanked on the name. There's a couple of films that come to mind, but they're so we were looking at films that had a kind of significant kind of narrative focus on cricket. So there wasn't a huge number, but by all means, Russell, please let me know if I've missed any, because I'm conscious that there are gaps there undoubtedly. So we're always trying to expand and address any gaps there are. And the issue of documentary, so yeah, sometimes it is difficult to make that distinction. But we kind of, and it might even be, I'm trying to think, do we have any we certainly have, I think we did end up putting in we have some short films that crept in there for various reasons, but mostly we haven't gone into documentary as such yet, because there's just such a huge number. We were trying to kind of distill it down to something that was meaningful and practical to do with the resources that we had as a starting point. But we are going to definitely get to documentary. That's the next step. And when we talk about documentary, there's such a huge history and really important history of documentary in sport going right back. And depending how you define documentary, you can say non-fiction more broadly, whether it's newsreels or going back to the early depictions. Like there's some wonderful depictions I was looking at recently, going right back to the Lumiere brothers. Like sport is there. It's such a ubiquitous aspect of European society that it's in every decade, and it's across all kind of film genres. You'll find sport, and part of our challenge was to kind of distill that down to something that we could meaningfully address in our initial prototype, and then build from there in terms of capturing that story across Europe. But thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Sean. The time is over. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting, and thank you very much. As the University of Vic, Central University of Catalonia, is very happy to host this series, as well as the Spring Research Network is also very happy to have you in the core group, as well as one of the speakers of these seminars. Thank you very much, and good night to everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
everybody.
Take
Bye-bye.
Many thanks.
Bye-bye, Russell.